How about we start?
No, I had a challenge scoring. So
although just listening to them chatter would be worth it too, just for the attendance.
You've already got one.
They won't notice me.
What am I to do?
Hello, good evening, and welcome to Shoreline Community College and this discussion with U.S. military veterans of their experiences during and after the Vietnam War. My name is Derek Levy. I'm the Acting Associate Dean for Student Support Programs, which includes our veterans programs here at the college. And we're very deeply honored to host this discussion and to be a partner with the USA Vietnam War Commemoration, which you'll hear more about shortly. First, I want to give a shout out to Shoreline Community College's veterans programs. The college is proud to support veterans in achieving their higher education goals. We offer dedicated staff, students, and peer mentors, some of whom are in the back there. Support for our veterans, a Veterans Resource Center, as well as programs and services related to the endeavor of supporting our military-related students in their higher education goals. One example is our Got Your Six program, which promotes awareness and support within our college community for our current and former service members and their families. It's my honor to introduce the moderator of tonight's discussion, Dr. Andrew Ringlee. Dr. Ringlee is a historian at the U.S. Vietnam War Commemoration. He received his Ph.D. in history from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2016, and he oversees the Commemoration's Oral History Archive. The Oral History Project includes a growing collection of more than 300 interviews of Vietnam veterans and their families. Several of those interviews are taking place this week at the college, which has been our pleasure to sponsor. Now I'll turn the microphone over to Andrew, who will tell you more about the commemoration and introduce the distinguished panelists here with us. He will also explain the format of the discussion that will take place over the next 90 minutes.
I'd like to start off by thanking the Shoreline Community College community for hosting us, and in particular, Derek Levy, Amy Kinsel, Larry Fuel, and Jonathan Peebles for making us feel welcome here. And I would like to thank the public and any veterans in the audience for attending this panel. We have three extraordinary Vietnam veterans here to talk about their experiences in the war and why it's important that we commemorate veterans and Vietnam veterans in particular. What we'll do is we'll have about a 45-minute to an hour discussion among the panelists, and then we'll open the audience to ask questions to the panelists. Before I introduce the panelists, though, I must briefly explain what the Vietnam War Commemoration is and what we do. The Vietnam War Commemoration was created by an act of Congress in 2008, and it followed similar government-sponsored commemorations that honored veterans of the Second World War and the Korean War. The commemoration will last until Veterans Day 2025. The commemoration has 5 objectives, but the first and foremost of them is to thank and honor Vietnam veterans and their families for their service and valor. We define Vietnam veterans as anyone who served in the United States Armed Forces from 1st November 1955 to 15th May 1975. The Department of Veterans Affairs statistics put this number at 9 million Americans, 7 million of whom are still living. The commemoration does not distinguish between those veterans who served in Southeast Asia and those that did not. All would have gone to the front had their country called on them. And the Vietnam War profoundly shaped the service of all of these veterans. The commemoration reaches out to veterans through a commemorative partner program. Thus far, we have 9,000 commemorative partners, everything from Boy Scout troops to the NFL. The commemorative partners host events that honor and thank Vietnam veterans in their communities. Thus far, these 9,000 commemorative partners have thanked and honored an estimated 1.4 million veterans. In public ceremonies that we or our commemorative partners host, we usually present Vietnam veterans with the Vietnam Veterans lapel pin. This is an example of it. The pin on the back says, "A grateful nation thanks and honors you," which is the motto of the commemoration. This tradition of giving out pins follows previous traditions set by the Second World War commemoration and the Korean War commemoration. After the presentation, after the questions, we would be happy to present any Vietnam veterans in the audience with their Vietnam Veterans lapel pin, if you've not received one. So now I'll introduce the panelists. First, Joseph Crecca grew up in New Jersey, and his dream was to fly fighter planes. He realized his dream when he qualified to fly the F-4 Phantom. At the time, this was the United States' most advanced fighter aircraft. In Vietnam, he was attached to the 480th Tactical Fighter Squadron, which flew out of Da Nang Air Base. He flew his first combat mission on August 21st, 1966. 3 months later, in November 1966, he was shot down over North Vietnam. He was captured and spent the next 6.5 years in North Vietnamese prison camps as a prisoner of war. He was released in 1973 as part of Operation Homecoming and returned to the United States. He continued to fly for the Air Force and retired from the Air Force in 1978 with the rank of major. Continued his career as a pilot for FedEx and for the remainder of his flying career. Joe received the Air Force Commendation Medal, 2 Purple Hearts, the Distinguished Flying Cross, a Bronze Star, and many other commendations. Second, Bruce Crandall comes from Olympia, Washington. As a young man, he enlisted in the Army and later underwent officer candidate school and trained as an engineer and attended flight school. His first assignment was to map remote regions of the globe. He also worked on a new concept that the Army was developing in this time, and that was air mobility. He's an early pioneer in developing that type of tactic. He served 2 tours in Vietnam. His first assignment was as a commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Company A, 229th Assault Helicopter Battalion. At the Battle of Ia Drang Valley in November 1965, Bruce led helicopters into a hot landing zone to ferry in supplies and ferry out wounded soldiers. During this battle, he flew 22 missions, evacuating more than 70 wounded soldiers in a day. For this action, he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor by President George W. Bush in 2007. Bruce, in Vietnam, he returned after his first tour to his second tour and survived the helicopter crash in 1968. He spent nearly half a year in hospitals recovering from his injuries. He continued his military career, a series of posts after the war as an Army engineer and as a cartographer. He retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1977. For Bruce's distinguished service, he received the Distinguished Flying Cross, a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, and was honored with the Congressional Medal of Honor. And lastly, Joseph Galloway is a native Texan. He joined United Press International as a reporter in 1961. During his 22 years with UPI, he served in nearly a dozen news bureaus in the American Midwest and mostly in Asia. Joe began a 16-month tour of Vietnam as a war correspondent beginning in April 1965, shortly after the first American troops arrived in Vietnam. He did 3 other tours in Vietnam, one in 1971, one in 1973, and again in 1975 to cover the fall of South Vietnam and the revolution in Cambodia. He later joined U.S. News and World Report and wrote for McClatchy newspapers as a senior military correspondent. He gained notoriety in 2003 for pieces critical of the Bush administration in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq. Joe is most often recognized as the author of We Were Soldiers Once and Young. He's co-authored this work about the Ia Drang Valley with General Hal Moore. This work was turned into a feature film in 2002. Joe has received numerous awards for his writing, but his most significant recognition came in 1998 when the Army awarded him a Bronze Star for rescuing a wounded soldier under fire during the Battle of Ia Drang Valley in 1965. This was the only such medal for valor awarded to a civilian by the Army for actions undertaken during the Vietnam War. So, gentlemen, thank you for being on this panel. And I think an interesting way to begin the discussion is to ask you, before you went to Vietnam, what did you know of the war? How did you understand the war?
Well, first off, you should see I'm wearing an eagle. That's a retired colonel. And I understood more. I was married when I was very young. And my mother-in-law and I didn't get along that well. So. No, we trained very hard and very long to be an air mobile unit. And we had all of the Huey helicopters that were in any unit in the stateside in our division. It was 11th Air Assault Test Unit. And we had flying cranes, we had Chinooks, we had caribous, we had Mohawks for fixed wing, we had otters. So we had all of the things that the Army had available. And we tested all the concepts that we could think of before we went to Vietnam. And that included smoke generators for our helicopters to go across the landing zone, and we found out we couldn't control the smoke, and it blinded the pilots. So we gave up that, but I understand it became popular in one of the units some years later. So it doesn't matter what you do, there's always somebody who's going to try something behind you that you've already tested and failed. We had the unit went into Vietnam after we were down the Dam Rep. Most people forget we went in there in '65. And we came back and we had 12 days between the time I got my birds on the ground at Fort Benning and the time we had to put them on a ship going to Vietnam. So we had darn good training for combat, but not necessarily combat like we had in Vietnam. And Joe, this Joe, good Joe, had the toughest job in Vietnam when going north of the border and going into Hanoi. There was, and those of us that flew in the South had tremendous respect for them. And we wish that the Army had used the first cav to go in and try to get you guys out, because we could have done it. We could have gone low level into North Vietnam without, and we would have refilled halfway up, and it would have been something that we would have liked to have tried. And we did talk about it. That's all we did. The generals didn't talk about it. We did, the guys that were flying those birds. So anyhow, Joe Galloway was, I took him into the battlefield on the 14th of November. And I took him back out, so don't blame me. I was
Tried to charge me for the ride.
Have you gotten paid yet?
No.
And he's not the only one that hasn't. We have another medal recipient who has 6,000 pigs, roughly somewhere in that ballpark. And he argues like a wife. I wanted 2 pigs for taking him out. And he explained if I hadn't taken him in, he wouldn't have got shot. What kind of nonsense is that? He bled all over my damn helicopter. Now I'm down to 1 pig. I hope he doesn't send it to me. Oh boy, would I be in trouble. But we do that line as if I could stop somebody from being put on my aircraft or would. Coming out of a hot landing zone, all you want to do is get the hell out of there. My wingman, Ed Freeman, got the Medal of Honor before I did, and rightly so. He was the only one that volunteered to go. I was the commander. I had 20 helicopters and 1 Jeep. The Air Force kept trying to steal my damn Jeep.
You stole the Jeep.
I had to steal one for the Air Force. I traded some plywood being lifted into on K, and Freeman and I stole the Jeep from the Special Forces.
We had a bigger budget anyway.
Yeah, you think. Bigger aircraft, too. Anyhow, that's my story. I was All-American in high school baseball out of Olympia. Ball fields are named after me. And the thing that my classmates remember is that my batting average was 3 times my grade point. And that Marcia Cass beat me up in the school cafeteria when I was a senior in high school. She was bigger than I was.
Over to me. Over to you, Joe. No, I'm glad you promoted yourself, Bruce, because if you hadn't, I was going to do it anyway. When Vietnam got started, I was an ordnance engineer working at Picatinny Arsenal. in the Guerrilla and Counter-Guerrilla Ordnance Unit. And I read about airplanes being shot down in Vietnam, F-105s and F-4s. And that aggravated me no end. And even though I had a job as a civilian working for the Army, I decided that I should do something other than just design weapons to help the United States Army soldier in fighting the Viet Cong. And I took the Air Force officer qualification test on New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve of 1963. Joined the Air Force, went through pilot training, became a fighter pilot, and hit Da Nang in August of 1966. And after 92 days of flying missions, I got shot down on my 75th mission over the north, my 86th total mission. So I have a shoulder patch that says 86 and a half missions. Oh, for the other half. I was convinced that communism was something that needed to be stopped. And we all know that how many Jewish people were murdered by the Nazis. What most people don't know is how many people were murdered by communism. And I've been attending Vietnam War forums at high schools, and I asked the kids how many Jewish people were murdered by the Nazis, and sadly, some of them don't even know the 6 million figure. But almost none of them know how many were murdered by the communists up to the time that the United States got involved in Vietnam. And how many of you know? I'll bet you don't. And I'm not trying to make fun of you. But the moderate figure is 110 million. The high figure is more like 260 million. And it's not called genocide, it's called democide. It's murder by government. And so if somebody says we shouldn't have been in Vietnam, I say, well, you know, fighting against a regime that killed that many people doesn't seem like such a bad idea. And so that's my position on whether we should have been in Vietnam or not. And if you ask the countries that were in that region, Philippines, Thailand, all the way down to Singapore, what was the result of the United States commitment in Vietnam? It stayed free of communism. And that's the legacy of the Vietnam veteran. And it'll always be that way. The Berlin Wall came down, Soviet Union collapsed, and if it wasn't for the commitment of the United States and the Vietnam veteran, none of that would have ever happened.
Oh, along about 1963, I was the State House Bureau Chief in Topeka, Kansas for United Press International, and I started reading stories out of a place called Saigon. Dispatches by a guy named David Halberstam of the New York Times, and Neil Sheehan of UPI, and Mal Brown of the AP. And the more I read, the more I became convinced that it was going to become an American war, and it was going to become the war of my generation. And I figured that 50 years on, it would be a lot easier to explain why I went than if I didn't and missed the war of my generation. I wanted to go, and as a kid, I read the collected dispatches of a guy named Ernie Pyle in World War II. And I was greatly moved by his reporting and how he wrote and how he covered his war from the pointy end of the stick. And I wanted to do that. And I started writing a letter a week to my bosses in New York, volunteering, begging, pleading, threatening, reporting that I'd gotten my 24 injections out at the Air Force Base in Topeka, and I was ready to rock and roll. And I think it came down after the election in 1964, when Lyndon Johnson won himself a term as president, that either they had to fire me or send me. And they called up, and my boss said, do you have a trench coat? And I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. I said, no. He said, well, you better buy one. You're being transferred overseas to Tokyo, Japan, the Asia Division headquarters. And I was headed there, arrived in late November of 1964, and went straight to the boss and said, I want to go to Saigon. Oh, he laughed. He said, we just sent a second American to Saigon to cover that war, and we'll never need more than that. And I bided my tongue and sat back, and 5 months later, early April of 1965, I was on a plane to Saigon, and I spent 2 days there getting my press cards, and I was off to Da Nang to cover the 1st Battalion of Marines that had just landed 3 weeks before with a mission to guard the airfield out there. They were running strikes both in country and out of country up in the north, and they decided somebody better protect the place against the VC, and so they sent 1 battalion of Marines. And the trouble with protecting an airfield is if you put a line around it, the enemy may be pushed back a mile or two, but if he's shooting rockets, he can still range the place. And so they said, well, we need 2 battalions of Marines. And then they said, we not only need a static guard, we need to patrol. So we need a 3rd battalion of Marines. And the war was on. And I spent my first 7 months covering the Marines. I made every operation they did in I Corps to include 1 combat amphibious assault landing. And there ain't nobody wearing a Marine uniform today who's ever done one of those except me. What I found, though, was the Marines walked to war. And I wore out 2 pair of boondocker boots and a lot of fatigues, and I got the crotch rot and the pit rot and the foot rot and every kind of rot running through those rice paddies with the Marines walking to war. And I heard about this division, new experimental Army division with 435 helicopters in their TO&E, and I said, that's for me. I'm going to ride to war. So I transferred myself up to the Central Highlands to play coup and got in all kinds of trouble, not least of which was running into this guy on the end down there. He did give me a ride into the battle, made me sit on a case of hand grenades.
That didn't work.
And I found myself in the bloodiest battle of the Vietnam War in the Ia Drang Valley, November 1965. 234 American boys killed in 4 days, probably 310 or 15 wounded in that same period of time. Total on the campaign, 305 dead, but somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 North Vietnamese regulars were killed in that operation. The 1st Cavalry Division commanders asked Saigon, and Saigon asked Washington, Pentagon, and the White House for permission to pursue the fleeing enemy who were crossing into Cambodia to rest and refit and reinforce. And my co-author, General Moore, and I got declassified copies of the cables. And the cable that went back to Saigon and back to the 1st Cavalry Division commander said, under no circumstances can you cross that imaginary line on the map that designates the difference between Vietnam and Cambodia. So right then and right there, I think we ceded the strategic initiative to General Vo Nguyen Giap and the North Vietnamese Regular Army. They would thenceforth decide where to fight, when to fight, how long to fight, and leave when they were ready to leave and cross that line and rest and refit and reinforce and decide where next to attack. Not the smartest way to fight a war, but that's how that one was fought. You know, when I went there, I didn't know squat about the military, and I didn't know squat about war except what I had seen in John Wayne movies. But I learned real quick. That was a very tough war. I saw it from the pointy end of the stick, just like I intended to, and I did that tour for 16 months, and that's another point. At the end of that 16 months, all my friends in the 1st Cavalry Division and the Marines and the other divisions I marched with all got up and went home. They had done their tour. They left. A whole new crop of green troops arrived. And they all started the same learning curve. And what we had figured out by then is the first 3 months in country was when you took like 70% of the casualties for that year. The learning curve in combat is very steep and very costly, and I don't think you win wars by deciding arbitrarily that after 6 months every officer in the field will be transferred into the rear and replaced by green officers, and every soldier and Marine in the field after 12 months or 13 in the case of the Gyrenes will go home. And meanwhile, our enemy had a different term of service. Their enlistment was for victory or death, and that was the only way they were going home. Not many of them made it. We made a lot of mistakes, not the fault of the soldiers and the Marines who fought that war. Some of the most honorable men that I've ever met, some of the most loyal men and friends that I ever hoped to meet. And I hope that I have done a good job telling their stories. I'm continuing to work on that for the Vietnam War 50th commemoration, doing interviews. We've got over 350 interviews in the can, and we're marching forward. We did 4 today. We'll do 4 tomorrow. We did 4 on Monday. And we count them up, and we send them to the Library of Congress Oral History Archives. And someday, maybe long after we're all dead, researchers will be able to go to that archive and do original research, listening to the voices and the stories of the people who fought that war. And I think that's important, because we can speak on after our death.
It's not very encouraging to hear that my interview is in a can someplace.
No,
We'll be on a website.
It's in Washington, D.C. It's the same.
Well, that whole place is a can.
Joe brings up a great thing to discuss, and that is, and I'd love to ask the panelists, what is your impression of the American servicemen and women who were sent to Vietnam? Can you talk a little bit about the qualities of these service people?
Top notch.
I would say the same thing. One thing that I want to correct on Joe is that we didn't shift everybody out at 6 months. Hal Moore stayed in command. He moved up. Tony stayed in command. I stayed in command for a year. I led 756 combat missions my first tour. And my second tour, I was on my 909th and a half. And the Air Force dropped 2 bombs on my helicopter and put me in the hospital for 5
Oh, you're a slow learner.
I was. Yeah, I thought 10 feet was safe. But I found out that your sphere of influence is greater than 10 feet. Anyhow, I stayed in command for a year, and I went back in 13 months. The bad thing that we did was that we went over as a unit, but we had to ship our people home, and we had to send them to other units for the whole year. So at 6 months, I had to have half my people gone. Now, you can't imagine how tough it is for a young commander to have to tell people that you've been with for 2.5 years that you know the families, you know the kids, you know the wives, you know them. And you've got to tell them they got to go to the 101st or the 82nd or some other unit, so we don't all try to come home at once out of the first cab. And that was one of the dumb things that we did, and that we should never do again. If we're sending people over as a unit, take them home as a unit, then you still have the unit back in the States to send out again. And that's what they do now. But if what we did was, there was no first cab, and Joe is right. You didn't have experience. And I lost 1 crew in 756 combat missions. And we knew what the hell to do. We came in at very low level. We came through the trees. The infantry didn't like that. I'd hit trees on purpose with the skids. That keeps the infantry worrying about dying with me rather than dying in the combat zone. But we went into an area in the Central Highlands, and it was jungle, and we had a commanding or DCG that wouldn't let us use engineer equipment to build the base camp. That doesn't sound like much, but when you're pulling stumps with a damn Huey, it's dumb. And most of the commanders in the aviation unit in the CAV were Corps of Engineer officers. So we had all had command times in the engineer units. We knew how to use heavy equipment, and yet we ended up building a facility in the jungle. So those are dumb decisions that were made. The dumb decision back in the States impacted on our guys because they decided we'd go into the Central Highlands at Ankei instead of going up to Pleiku and taking the Army facility there and putting the CAV in there and moving the 52nd Aviation Battalion out. So these are things we could have done that we didn't do, and the things we need to learn in our future use of military that we don't have to learn again. Because Joe, incidentally, Joe didn't just get a Bronze Star, he got a Bronze Star with V. And that's a hell of a lot rarer than a Bronze Star. And he did try to help our wounded in that battlefield. And I think he was packing a weapon, so he would have defended our people the same as he would defend himself. And a lot of reporters didn't do that kind of stuff. They'd just come in, eat up your rations, and make nasty comments.
Well, your rations weren't that good, Bruce.
They were where I was. Anyhow, that's, I wanted Joe to know that the Air Force bombing.
Did right by you.
Well, I don't think 5 months. I have 13 vertebrae wired together today because of that. And that just happened 3 years ago, so 2.5 years ago. So when I went down, I crushed 5 vertebrae, and they've all gone to hell since then. And so when you age, those things catch up with you. So when you say that somebody's still having physical problems from Vietnam, it's still possible. I'm never going to be able to walk straight. I can turn my head that far, up and down that far. because of the operation. Thanks to the Air Force.
You bet. I'm a lot shorter because I ejected.
I don't know what that means.
But you're a lot more alive.
Well, yeah. 18 Gs will do that to you.
Yeah.
Joe and I and our group went back to Vietnam in '93,
Yeah.
and we went to the Hanoi Hilton, and we met with General Gipp, and this was General On and Mon and Colonel Took.
Yep.
And we went back on the battlefield with them, and they had tears in their eyes too. They lost a lot of people in there.
Well, you can say that they lost a lot of people, but
Oh, we killed a lot of them.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for what you guys were doing.
But, you know, for instance, when you look back at Tet 68, you know what Tet is, the Lunar New Year Festival? This is a time when the Vietnamese are celebrating a holiday every year, year of the snake, year of the rat, year of the rooster, whatever. And that's a time when it's supposed to be a peaceful time. So guess when this general that had tears in his eyes and Ho Chi Minh, who always dresses himself in white because he's so pure and honest, you know, that's when they conducted their sneak attack all over South Vietnam. Tet 68, January the 30th, right? And it was, in the words of one book that I read, the failure of the Tet offensive was a devastating military setback for the communists. But everybody in the United States thought it was a defeat for the United States because of the sensationalism of the mainstream media. You might hear me say this more than once, willing accomplices of the left that gave the American public a misleading impression of the power and popularity of the Viet Cong. We lost 1,536 brave Americans. They lost over 45,000. So who won the Tet Offensive? And then the 77-day siege at Khe Sanh, we lost 200 U.S. Marines. They lost, by one estimate, 10,000, another estimate, 15,000. In the period from the end of January to the end of March 1968, the combined Viet Cong and North Vietnamese regular losses exceeded 58,000. What is this telling you? It tells me that Ho Chi Minh and Vo Nguyen Giap were more than willing to sacrifice tens of thousands of their own people's lives in order to get a political advantage on the American TV screens back in the States. And they did it time after time. And all that, just let me say one more sentence. And they did that time after time, and what was the effect? It increased the anti-war fervor in the United States, and it made the war last longer, and it put more names on the black granite wall. Thank you very much, anti-war movement.
I tell you, when we sat down with General Giap, I asked him, I said, they say that you sent more than 1 million of your citizens to their deaths in this war. And he said, yes. And I would have sent 5 million or 10 million. We would have fought for 20 more years or 50 more years if that's what it took to get the foreigner out of our country. And I was left in no doubt that he meant exactly what he said, and that he would have done that, they would have done that. We inserted ourselves into a civil war in Vietnam that was being waged in a country. We should have read our history a whole lot more better before we went in there. General Giap sent General Moore and me, he said, go down to the Natural Museum of History here Natural History Museum. They have a timeline of Vietnam history on the wall. It's a mural, and it's both a map and a timeline, and it shows that over 1,000 years, China invaded Vietnam, occupied Vietnam on one occasion for 600 years. And 6 times they came, 6 times they were driven out by the Vietnamese, a smaller nation with fewer population, but willing to die to expel a foreigner from their country. And what I noticed, since we're talking statistics here, Joe, is that in the best year that we had in Vietnam, we never killed more Vietnamese communists than the natural birth rate increase in North Vietnam. So that meant that every year there was a new crop coming on of draftees that would be drafted, trained, sent south to win or die. And we were never going to beat their numbers and their birth rate increase, because we simply, using everything we had, we couldn't kill enough of them.
We sure got their attention between December the 18th and December the 29th, 1972, though.
Yeah, but who won the war?
Well, we did, actually. It was Congress that snatched defeat from the jaws of victory.
Well, we're going political now, Joe.
Let's, on that thread, let's talk about what is the legacy of the Vietnam War on American society?
On the young, I don't think. I don't think there's much. On the old, I think there's a lot. Because we lost brothers and sisters, and we lost, well, not too many sisters, but there were nurses that were with us that did a wonderful job. And sometimes they got killed in the ordering in the battles. But I don't think the young people think much about Vietnam. They watched Afghanistan and Iraq much more closely, probably. And Vietnam was, and I don't think the Vietnamese leadership or the soldiers felt about their people the same as we felt about ours. I don't think that for a minute. But they had tears in their eyes when we were in that damn combat zone. We went back into X-ray. Colonel Took, in particular, the one that I was dealing with the most, he lost a lot of people. And I don't care what kind of military you're in, you develop some kind of feeling about your people. And you do it. Now, the leadership may not give a rat's ass, excuse me. The leadership might not care about a rodent.
I'm really offended.
By the rodent? Anyhow, my men were the most important thing in the world to me while we're in combat. I wanted to make sure I brought them home. I didn't make stupid statements to them. Like I didn't tell them I would bring them home, because you can't impact that. That's no more than you can impact that you're going to take them all to Vietnam with you when you go, because there's car wrecks and there's all sorts of other little things that come up that guys have to stay home for. So you end up without people. But I'm totally convinced that those people in those days, after 25 years of how many years was it, Joe? 93 anyhow, from 65. They impressed me, and because I thought they were soldiers and commanders.
Yep. We spent 4 or 5 days on that little bus riding around the highlands with those guys.
Yep.
And talking to them. And Colonel Took came down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He was company commander, North Vietnamese Army. a veteran of Dien Bien Phu. And they came down the trail and they hung a left at the Ia Drang Valley and walked right into the biggest battle of the Vietnam War. And Colonel Took said, we walked into a sea of fire, and we thought none of us could survive this. But some of us did, and we fought on. We rode that bus with those guys, and we talked to them. And I don't want to overstress or overstate, but General Moore and I left that experience with the feeling that maybe we had more in common with our old enemies than we had with your average American civilian. We had shed blood. We believed in what we believed. They believed in what they believed. They were willing to die for their cause and we for ours. And I, for one, had a great deal of respect for them, still do. They were good soldiers. They were good fighters. And they were locked into a battle. Colonel Took spent 8 years in the South. He was wounded 8 times. He said, twice I ordered my men to leave me behind. The Americans were pressing too close on us, and they couldn't carry me. I'm a big guy. And I said, leave me, and they disobeyed my orders. They carried me on. A remarkable soldier and commander. So it was an interesting experience for Colonel Moore and I to go there and sit down and talk for 6 hours with General Mon, who was the overall commander, 5 hours with General An, who was Hal Moore's opposite number on the battlefield, and with, more importantly, perhaps, General Hoang Phong, who was the chief of history for the Vietnam Army. And in 1965, 2 months before the battle, his commanders ordered him, a historian, to march south on the Ho Chi Minh Trail to write the after-action report on a battle that had not even occurred to us yet. And he came out on the battlefield in the latter days of the campaign and indeed wrote a 70-page booklet that was circulated to the North Vietnamese Army and the VC in South Vietnam, titled How to Fight the Americans. And they developed, they knew how to fight the French. They'd beat their ass. But the French were a road-bound army with trucks and tanks. And we were introducing the helicopter. We were able to jump all over the battlefield behind them. And the arrival of the cavalry really gave them cause for great concern that they had to figure out a way to fight the Americans with these new weapons. And they put their finger right on it. It was a simple slogan, grab them by the belt buckle. You get in under the air power, you get in under the artillery ring, and when you're close enough that you're looking them right in the eye, it's one man against another with a bayonet and a rifle. And you even out the battlefield. You even the odds. And General An told us what he learned from the fight. With these helicopters, we had to have a place to land. Up in the highlands, up in the forests and the jungles, there's only so many clearings. He says, I couldn't put an army on every clearing, but I could put 1 or 2 scouts and a radio, and I could learn where you're coming. And General An went on to be the division commander who fought us on Hill 875, Dak To. a really fierce battle. And he told us that he took his regimental commanders up to the top of that hill, and they are all standing around looking, and he says, I want you to prepare very strong, very deep fortifications up here. And my officers looked at me and said, whatever for, General? I said, for the Americans. And they said, but there are no Americans around here. And I said, dig the holes and I'll provide the Americans.
And while the North Vietnamese regulars were holding onto our belt buckles, the United States Air Force were shooting their buttons off. I saw the movie last night.
One thing
about the difference, the legacy of the Vietnam vet, what the people, the attitude of the American public then and the attitude of the American public now is that they remember even the people that might have been against the war. When the GIs were coming home, Marines, Navy, Air Force, Army, when they were coming home, they were getting spat upon. And now that's all completely turned around. Guys that are coming home on airplanes are greeted with American flags, and they're welcomed home. When you see a guy in uniform at an airport, they're offered to get on the airplane first. When I used to be an airline pilot, and when I'd see one of these guys in uniform, I'd go to the gate agent after having talked to the guy, and I'd say, you see that guy over there? He's been traveling for 32 hours. You know, when you go to board the airplane, don't make him wait for row 24. You know, get him on the airplane first, give him something to eat. If he wants something, put it on my tab, I'll pay for it. And that's the way soldiers and Marines are treated today. It's not like Vietnam. So that's another legacy of Vietnam, because people remember what jerks they were back in 1970 and 1968, and they don't want to act that way anymore.
So, next question, then going with that idea, why is it important that we commemorate Vietnam veterans, and how can we do better to commemorate the veterans that are coming home right now?
By doing what you're doing right now. I go to 2 high schools in Snohomish. Why is it just two high schools there? It should be high schools all over the country that have a Vietnam Vets Forum, you know? So guys like Joe Galloway and Bruce Crandall can go in there and talk to these. I go to 3 high school periods in the morning, 3 high school periods in the afternoon, and the only downside of it is they serve frozen lasagna that they put in the oven for lunch. But the kids are great, you know. They take notes, you know. I ask them these questions, you know. I give them these. I don't know what the heck you call it. You know, I say, you know, the United States and Vietnam was like a superbly conditioned heavyweight boxer that's put into the ring with a veteran lightweight, okay? And our heavyweight boxer has his hands tied behind his back and he's blindfolded. How the hell is he going to fight this lightweight? He's getting hit left, right, and he doesn't even know where the hell he's getting hit from. That was the United States Army and Marines in Vietnam. And so I explain that to the kids. And I tell them about the rules of engagement, about how these political generals and politicians in Washington, D.C., SAC headquarters are running the war, and they don't have a clue about sending tactical assets after strategic targets, you know? What the hell are you doing? You know, you don't know what the hell you're doing. You're getting guys killed, you're getting people like me put in POW camps for 6 years, you know?
Sending F-4 Phantoms out to bomb bamboo bridges
over
a creek.
Yeah.
And risking a pilot that cost you a couple $100,000 to train, and an airplane that cost you millions.
They lost 7 B-52s in 4 days because they sent them down the same path at the same altitude every night for 3 or 4 hours, and they got shot down because after they released the bombs, it was a 120-degree right turn. Excuse me, Bruce, I'm going to make a turn in front of you. Into the wind, and when you make the turn, it's like turning your electronic countermeasures off, and that's when they launch all the surface-to-air missiles, and it would knock the B-52s down. So what did they do on the 5th night? Because one SAC general back in Thailand, he said, "I'm not sending my guys on any of these more missions until you change this." They're not tactics; they're procedures. They're doing the same thing the Germans did in World War II and the Battle of Britain. You know, the Spitfire pilots are sitting around having a cup of tea. Oh, well, it's 10:28, chaps. It's time to take off now. We've got to meet 6 Ju-88s at 180 knots, heading 270 at 6,500 feet. They did the same thing every day, okay? And that's what we were doing. Until on the 5th night, this general said, I'm not doing that anymore. And instead of the same 3 ship cells every 15 minutes for 3 or 4 hours, they sent everybody going in all different coming in from all different directions, dropping all their bombs in 15 minutes. Nobody got hit. What a surprise.
I'd like to go back to the young folks thing. There's 72 living recipients of the Medal of Honor now. We have a program called the Character Development Program, and we've gone to something like 1,700 school districts, schools so far, to teach the young about citizenship, honor, integrity, and service. But not service in the military. That's what we're getting in. We get in trouble when we try to get to a school district that's got the belief that we're trying to recruit. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to teach the young. We bring the teachers in. We put substitute teachers in the classroom for them. You know, we have food for them at noon, and we give them computer information that they can take back, and it talks about what the Medal of Honor means and about what character the young should know. There's 17,000 school districts, and it's very difficult for us to reach them all. But for every time they have one, there's a Medal of Honor recipient goes to that school where we bring them in. So we are working on it, and it's because of the Vietnam experience that we did have. When I came home, I didn't wear a uniform off post. Somebody tried spitting on me, and I'm going to take them out. And not to dance. I want to. So if my wife wouldn't, she had to take care of the boys while I was gone. Then she had to take care of me while I was in the hospital at Madigan. She was living in Kent at the time, and she pointed out what a bad husband I was because I expected her to be there every day. And she still had the 3 boys and take care of the house and do all those things. So the families were hurt as much as the military guys in a lot of cases, and sometimes more. When those 58,000 names on the wall had wives, and fathers, and sisters, and brothers, and so somebody missed the point that the families were in this battle just as much as we were. My oldest boy was going to school in Kent, Washington, and a teacher refused to teach him because his father was a killer in Vietnam. Now, my wife didn't tell me about that when I came home, and I was in Fort Carson, Colorado when she finally told me. Because if she told me, I'd have gone after that teacher. Because you shouldn't do that to a kid. He's a straight-A student. He was an Eagle Scout. So my wife had to take care of the family, and then when I came home in the hospital for 5 months, she had to finally explain to me that when I was in Vietnam, I wasn't a pain in the rear. She used a different expression. But that's when I figured out, you know, I'm not a good husband, because I was expecting her to be there, and she still had the boys and had the house, and she had to do all the things she had to do while I was in Vietnam, except write me letters. that the families took a lot of the brunt for Vietnam. Today, not so much so. They talk on a cell phone. They have computers and they have all this other stuff that there's communications, and they don't take a 13-month tour.
I want to break in here just to say that while we're on the subject of honor, that Antioch University has established the Bruce and Arlene Crandall Social Courage Award, a scholarship that will first be granted in the fall of 2017. Bruce's son, Steve, is on the Antioch University Board of Governors, and he founded this. It was his idea. And the Bruce and Arlene Crandall Social Courage Award will reduce the financial barrier between idea and action and encourage recipients to break new ground in the promotion of social justice. The award also includes faculty, community, and alumni mentorship and support. So far, they've collected over $50,000 in contributions, and it continues to grow with support for the community. And I endorse that heartily. And I'll be making a donation, and I hope some of you will as well. Bruce and I have been at each other for 52 years now. We do this dog and pony show in various venues, and I love the guy. And I'm heartily sorry that Miss Arlene is no longer with us because she was a great civilizing influence on him.
Would you stand up, please? Yeah. She's from Antioch College, and she's in charge of that. Yeah. So my wife and I had a scholarship fund and still do it. I supported Olympia High School, and we've given $46,000 to that program since we started. I was paying them back for letting me graduate. I had teachers.
By acclamation, it was.
And the teachers all agreed that I shouldn't stay.
So could I ask the three panelists for some concluding remarks before we open it up to the audience to let them pose questions to you?
I have a concluding remark, and it's actually a pitch. In 2015, local veterans got together and started a project. And does everybody know what a B-52 looks like?
Sure
8 engines.
It's got a smoke trail behind you, and it's way up there.
You can't hear it until it's too late.
That's right.
You hear it when the bombs have hit the ground.
There's been a B-52G up at Payne Field, and it's been up there for 26 years. It's been languishing there, and we've decided that we're going to bring it down to Boeing Field and make it part of the Vietnam Air War Memorial Park, which is going to be built across the street just south of the existing pavilion where there's 19 Boeing airplanes. The executive director of the Museum of Flight is here with us today, Lori Haig, and she's going to supervise this very worthwhile project. It's going to be very expensive. It's going to be $2.2 million. The website's going to be up on June the 1st, so I suggest that you keep tabs on the Museum of Flight events. Look for that website, and when it comes up, you can start funneling your bucks for that thing. It's going to be the only memorial park of its kind in the entire world. There's going to be a 9-foot bronze statue of an aviator looking back at the B-52. It's going to pay tribute to all the airplanes that were lost there, some 8,000, 3,300 in North Vietnam and the rest in South Vietnam, including the choppers that Bruce flew and Joe Galloway flew in. And it's going to be the finest aviation museum. The Museum of Flight in Seattle is the finest, one of the finest in the world, and this is going to be right across the street from it. Thank you very much.
If any of you hadn't been to that Museum of Flight, it's very, very
One of my F-4s is there. It's from the 366 Tactical Fighter Wing. It's got a Gatling gun strapped onto the belly. It fires 100 shots a second.
Does it hit?
Joe, do you have any quick?
No,
Okay.
I'm ready for questions.
Let's open up to the audience. Yes, sir, in the green.
Yeah,
Oh, we have a mic for you.
yeah, I'm Bill Glick. I'm a former Marine platoon commander and a ARVN advisor.
Ain't no former Marines.
That's what I said. I'm retired, actually. Bowie Tin, I don't know if you've ever heard of Bowie Tin. He was the NVA colonel that came south in '64 and said, we have to bring the Army south in order to win. And then he brought the tanks through the door, through the gates of the Presidential Palace in '75. He was interviewed in 1997 by Wall Street Journal. And he said that if we would have followed the strategy that Westmoreland had to put troops from the South China Sea all the way to the Mekong River across Laos, we'd have won the war. Like your comments.
Bullshit.
Well, you know better. You know better than Bowie Tin. Huh?
Yes, I do.
Don't hold back, Joe. Tell us how you really feel.
Listen, you could never make a line across there, all the way across Laos. Not gonna work. If you move 10 miles inside Laos, the enemy moves the Ho Chi Minh Trail 5 more miles the other way.
That's why I say you had to go all the way to the Mekong River.
You can't do that. We didn't have enough men.
Hadrian's Wall was longer than that.
We'd have to.
You know, the Romans did it.
How well did it work for the Romans?
Kept the Scots out.
Who's still up there? The Scots, not the damn Romans.
But they're part of the United Kingdom.
Next question.
Next question, please. Dave.
You couldn't, you'd have to use
I think we can hear you without the mic.
the air
Sometimes.
Okay,
difference.
I have a question for you. The way we go to war now has changed. When we were all in Vietnam, in the Vietnam era, for every one of you people that were in combat, there was like 10 or 12 of us supporting you. Now, when they go off to Iraq, Iran, it's all contracted out. No one has any money into it. So it's very easy for these people to stand here and applaud and welcome everybody back because they don't have any skin in it. They don't have anything to do with it. They don't have anybody there. I'd like to know what you feel about all this contracting that we're doing.
What hasn't changed is that the politicians are running the damn war. What they're supposed to do is tell the military, go out there and kick ass and get it over with. And they're not doing that.
Your number was a little off. It was 9-1. And most people that were in combat didn't fire, in Vietnam, didn't fire a weapon.
I know,
The other thing is that, of course, with contracting the whole damn war out, then the politicians can make more money. And do.
And it's not our company.
Yeah, they don't have many kids involved in the combat.
Question
None.
for the gentleman in the blue shirt in the second row.
Yeah, really quickly. Where would I see this statue here on this pamphlet?
Washington, D.C.
Washington,
Vietnam.
D.C. It's right next to the Vietnam Memorial.
Thank you.
It's
Yes,
all
sir.
on that.
And is the first air cav still in existence?
Oh, you bet. The 1st Cavalry
Fort Hood.
Division is at Fort Hood, Texas. It's no longer air cav, but it's a mix of infantry and armor.
That's what these Stetsons reflect. Joe has one because he's one of us. But I wore it in the White House the day I got the award.
So
And,
did I.
Yeah. You didn't get the award.
No, sir, but I wore my Stetson.
Yeah,
Next
but-
question, sir.
But-
It looks
let me
like
let
we're
me
making
finish.
some of the same mistakes politically that were made in Vietnam. How do we stop that? As you were saying, point us in the right direction and tell them, don't come back until it's over
How do you change
with.
the political structure? How
That's
do
what
you
I'm
change-
asking. Do you have any
Yeah.
suggestions?
No, well, there's more combat going on right now in Washington DC than there is out here.
I would say the answer to that question is elect smarter politicians, because we have seemingly dumbed down the politicians. And the dumber they get, the more mistakes they make, and the more costly it is to our soldiers, airmen, sailors, Marines.
I don't think there's an answer to your question.
Other than perhaps a political coup?
I don't think there is a
No.
smart politician.
We can hope.
I would like to go back to Stetson for a minute, because I wore it in the White House and I started to say that. And an Air Force aide to the president, General Single Star, I think, because he was in civilian clothes, came up and he says, "That's not appropriate." I said, "Sir?" He says, "The hat's not appropriate." I said, "Stetson, sir. The Stetson's not appropriate." He says, "The Stetson's not appropriate." And I told him, I said, "Well, rest assured, this is not the last inappropriate thing I'm going to do in my life." And I'm still working on that. But I don't think there's an answer to your question. We need brave commanders to stand up for what's right and be willing to give those stars away if they have to. And there's not many of them that really want to do that, because most of them are not raised in the love of troops and leadership. We haven't had one single living Medal of Honor recipient out of Iraq. We have 11 out of Afghanistan. Now, I think some general got control over the Iraq thing, because I think we'll go back and we'll find some guys who committed their life and gave up their life for their fellow troops.
Next question.
Major Crecca,
Sir.
I was watching you sit up there smiling, and you had to pay a price more than any of us should have to be asked to pay. Could you tell us what it's like to be one day in a POW camp, and then also, how did you feel when they told you you're going to get released?
Well, the first day, I would say, you would expect me to say the first day was the worst. But actually, the day I got released was probably the worst. Because on that day, I found out that my wife had divorced me 13 months earlier, and I found out that my father had died 5 years before.
Yeah.
But does that really answer your question? Yeah, the first day was kind of horrible, because I got shot down, I got captured, they put me in the ropes, they tortured me for an hour and a half for information that I wasn't going to give them, but I had to take the pain before I gave them a BS answer, because if you just start talking and giving them an answer, they don't believe you, because they think correctly that he's just talking to make us stop torturing him. So then I gave him a cock and bull story, and then I gave him the same story for a week and repeated myself for seven days, and then they quit asking me the same questions. I forged friendships with guys that I'll never forget. The best friends I ever had.
Next question, please.
I was a snake eater, so I have a little different perspective on all this. And my father was shot down by the Germans, and I heard about POW camps for years. My question is probably rhetorical. I don't know. Take a shot at it if you want. Didn't anybody, I mean, from the top on, well, not on down, some of us figured it out. Didn't anybody figure out that we're not in Kansas anymore. We're in a completely different world with a completely different
You talking about the prison camp?
No, not
war.
prison camp, but I
The
mean, you know,
war.
you go into a completely different environment.
It goes
where
back to what I was saying about the politicians. They didn't have a clue. You had Robert Strange, emphasis on Strange, McNamara, that's really his middle name, directing strikes from the flight deck of the Oriskany. What the hell does he know about tactical air? Nothing.
You had Lyndon Johnson directing airstrikes
Right.
from the Tuesday lunch at the White House every week.
Right.
Didn't anybody think,
They weren't thinking.
well, yeah.
That's
But didn't
another one of
anybody
those
think
questions we can't answer.
to
We don't know what the hell
to
they're
ask
thinking.
some of us that are there and learning?
You learn from.
I guess
The answer to your question is the military is supposed to try to solve a problem diplomatically. When the diplomatic measures fail, they tell the military, they tell this guy here and this guy here, go and solve the problem militarily. And then the politicians are out of it. And then the military solves the problem and they hand it back to the politician.
That's the way it's supposed to work.
That's the way it's supposed to work, right.
Never works that way.
Never works that way.
No.
Politicians
Well, it
take
worked-
the credit if it works,
It
and
worked
if
in
it
World War
fails,
II.
it's your fault.
It worked in World War II.
But in World War II, we had, all of our families were involved. All my uncles were in, my dad was in and went back in the Navy. I had one of my uncles lost both his boys in the war. And so we all were doing something. All of us gave up our bicycles and tires, and we lived on stamps. Those of you old enough to know, we had stamps for
Rationing.
We had rationing for gas. We had rationing for sugar,
Shoes,
shoes, and anything. We bought savings stamps. Every quarter I had went to buying
war
until
bonds.
I had 1875. I had a war bond.
How about toy helicopters?
They didn't have those damn things. That's what we flew. We got.
Yes, sir, please. You've been waiting for a while.
First of all, thank you
Everybody
for
was involved.
being here.
Matt's trying to get a question.
Well, no. We have
I have a question and directed to Mr. Galloway. When I first got there, I was with an engineering unit and I was with tunnel rats. And I'd like to know what your experience, if you've interviewed any tunnel rats or spent any time with tunnel rats.
Actually, I have, and I wrote a piece for UPI that they sold to Reader's Digest, and was published in 1965, an interview with tunnel rats. And I was very impressed because I didn't like small holes in the ground. Didn't want to do it myself, and I was very impressed with those who would take a flashlight in one hand and a .45 in the other and go down a rat hole looking for rats. And I must say, my mother, God rest her, she never understood what I did for a living because I worked for a news agency, and it was not visible to her or understandable. But when I got an article published in Reader's Digest, by God, she could show the ladies at the Bridge Club that I had legitimate occupation, sort of.
You had a
Yes, please.
legitimate what?
Occupation.
Matt, please.
First of all, thank you for holding this panel discussion. Major Crecca, good to see you.
How are you?
Thank you for your service to our country. Everybody in the audience who served, thank you for your service. I'm wondering from all three of you gentlemen what you would like the legacy of the Vietnam War to be and of those who fought.
I think I would like the legacy to be that we wouldn't go into something like that without having the intent to win. and letting our troops go ahead and win. And the other legacy I'd like to have of the Vietnam War is that more people would be involved in our military than we have as a percentage of our population, because I think that's a big problem. Our volunteer military is the best we've ever had. When we had the draft, we had the largest stockades we've ever had in the military. All of our installations were guarded from the exit, not the entrance. We didn't want the troops getting off into Tacoma from Fort Lewis, because they raised hell in Tacoma. And Tacoma didn't like the military. And our troops could only get off the post if they had a pass, and they could only go to Tacoma. They couldn't go to Seattle, because Seattle must have had a bigger deal to keep our people from being there. But today, we have the best military we've ever had. We have the smallest stockades. And of course, we have a lot more diversity. The women in the military today are some of our best helicopter pilots by far, because they weigh one hell of a lot less. They fit in that cockpit.
Don't drink as much.
You haven't met the modern Army, have you? But no, the top guns in our Apache helicopters are young females, and we have the best leadership we've ever had at the lower levels, the company level and the platoon level, are much better than what we used to have. So today, you couldn't close Fort Lewis if you even mention it, you're going to get in a lot of trouble, because everybody loves our military that are down there.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to answer his
Testing.
question.
Testing.
I wanted to answer the question from Channel 13. If you look at the Vietnam War, it was 11 years, 58,307 lives. Operation Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, almost as long, not as many lives. Operation Desert Storm, 100 hours, 129 lives. What was the difference? The difference was massive 550,000 troops all at once, massive airstrikes all at once, boom, it's over. Don't get a war to be in it, get in it to win it, and win it right away with massive, irresistible force before the enemy knows what's going on, and then it's all over. And you know what? There won't even be an anti-war movement.
Question over here, please.
So, my term of service was in the 70s. I was a psychologist. Does it work?
Go ahead.
Testing 1, 2. Oh, whoa. Okay. Cardioid mic. So I was a psych specialist at Fort Sam Houston. Never left the country, but I saw a lot of the results and the impact of battle on the soldiers returning for treatment. A question occurred to me, though, when you were talking about the numbers of people killed by the communists. I wondered if your numbers included the Chinese Cultural Revolution.
As a matter of fact,
Because I think they were getting close to 1 billion with Mao's Great Leap Forward.
No,
not even
not
close.
not even close.
Really?
Yeah.
But so did those numbers
There's
include
only
that?
1 billion in the country.
Yeah, now.
Could they have killed them all?
Well, there's how
Who's
many
eating
billion
all
are
that
in?
rice?
Yeah, well, that was the thing. They were exporting rice at a time when they were running short of it to show the world that Mao's revolution was successful. So a lot of people starved to death.
the page that I have says China, this is as of the early 60s, 65 million.
Oh, okay. They've had to revise that upward because the records and the information available to China has been, up until recently, quite scanty and well guarded.
It still
So-
is. The Chinese Communist Party is very
Yeah,
opaque.
but anyway, it was horrendous. Anyway. But I want to especially thank you for your perspective on fighting communism as a part of what we were doing in Vietnam.
You bet.
One last question. The gentleman in the white shirt who's got his arm, beard.
Our biggest losses some of our biggest losses were in the Civil War. So, when they
Still are.
looked
I
back-
guess this is on. My name's Craig Ford, and I served in the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Vietnam, 64 to on Okinawa to 66 and now. Anyways, I more than anything want to make a comment and see if you gentlemen agree with this. I think one of the legacies of the Vietnam War has been the veterans benefits that the new veterans get that we never get. Treatment for PTSD, suicide prevention, although that's still a big deal. But I think that's one of the legacies of the Vietnam War is some of the treatments the vets are getting today that we never got when we came back in the 60s and 70s.
I'd like to answer that because PTS, and the Army doesn't refer to it with a D anymore. It's not a disorder. Every one of you has had PTS at one time, or will have. You lose a kid, you lose a baby, you lose the guy who has 5 kids and loses his job and he owes more than he can pay on his house. Those cause PTS. The other thing is the suicide rate has been played up. But over half the people that have committed suicide in our Guard and Reserve have never been deployed. So it's not a combat thing. It's a fact in our society that it's getting more and more popular for us to off ourselves. I'm not sure parents aren't doing some of that.
With that, okay, this will be the last comment.
Legacy of Agent Orange.
Yeah.
You keep thinking about,
Well-
okay, folks didn't come home.
But you didn't get Agent Orange if you didn't go to Vietnam.
Well, that's my thing right now, is that folks who went to Vietnam have been exposed to Agent Orange, and we're dying hundreds every day, dying of cancer, family members, for instance.
We lose about 400 Vietnam vets every day.
Is that what it is now?
Yeah, but
For
it's
all
age.
causes.
We're getting old.
Okay, so
I'd like to make a comment.
we're going to offer Vietnam veterans lapel pins to the veterans in the audience who haven't received one. And if you'd like to make comments or speak with the panelists, they'll be up here afterwards briefly. Sure, yeah, very fast.
I'm Francisco. I served with the Americal Division. Francisco Ibarra, I served with the Americal Division, 196th Light Infantry Brigade, 1st to the 23rd Infantry Company C, 68, 69.
We're interviewing you tomorrow.
And also a Purple Heart recipient. But you know, I want to thank all of you for being here, and I really appreciate all your comments. But I have to say this, because I have attended a lot of these, and I never see minorities up there, and I never see women up there. And they served in Vietnam. We have 14 Congressional Medal of Honors that are Hispanics. You know, the longest prisoner of war is a Hispanic, Alvar Alvarez. I took my son to that panel over there at the Vietnam Memorial. I told him, we're going to go from this end to that end. And we're going to look at all these panels. And in every single panel, there's a Hispanic name on there. Now, how come we get left out? You know, they made a documentary called The War, and they left Hispanics out. You know, not only Hispanics, but also other minorities and women. There's something wrong here. We make a contribution to this country. You know, there were Hispanics in the Vietnam War. There were Mexicanos. They were not even American citizens. We have several of them that were Congressional Medal of Honor winners, recipients. You know, and I don't see that anywhere when I go to hear a panel on Vietnam. I am the president of the Vietnam Veterans of America for the state of Washington. Okay? Tony, how you doing? All right? But there's something wrong here because we have perspective on the Vietnam War, and so do women, but it's being left out.
If you've got an axe to grind, this is not the place to grind.
It's not an axe to grind, sir. It's not an axe to grind.
Go grind it someplace else.
You're grinding it.
Really?
You're
Go
grinding
write it somewhere else?
The
problem is
right.
that we've been left out of the history books. That's the problem,
My son
sir.
was born
No,
in
that's all I have to say.
My son was born in Costa Rica, and Yeah, well, good for you. You
All
had an
right.
axe to grind, so don't grind it here.
We're going to close the discussion. Are there any Vietnam veterans who have not received their Vietnam Veterans Lapel Pin who would like to? Who served in the U.S. Armed Forces from 1st November 1955 to May 15th, 1975. Please come forward. We have pins. Help me out with this.
You were right. You had an axe to grind. I would have told him to go.
I was looking for some figures in here
Where'd you serve? Afghanistan? You?
No, sir. My grandparents, Palermo.
Drill instructor.
I hope you get the dog.
Uh-oh.
So 9 years now.
Notes that you read Spanish. Thank you for your service. What that was.
The point, I have a son, a grandson that's born in Costa Rica.
Yep.
So you ever seen the Navajo River?
Oh, I used to fish it. My grandpa lived, I would spend the summers on his farm, and we would walk down to the Navasota River. It's about a half a day's walk, and we would camp out, and that brings back memories.
And they picked up some of us.
Take care.
They picked up my wingman, they picked up Teddy Roosevelt. But they couldn't say, go back to because that's racist.
National Guard.
All right.
And this book has been touched. Thank you again. I do appreciate it. And my condolences, and I know General Moore just passed.
Yeah.
I finished his biography like, just a couple months ago. Yeah.
Five living ones.
Yeah, his died last
We had five.
Ringlee was carrying
Thanks again. I appreciate it.
One of them, 94, they just rolled me over. And I was in there 14 hours. When they did the rest of it. One thing I was in your heart. Sometimes those things have come out of my mind.
We knew that we were going to win. After a guy I know who was
Everybody was in trouble. And look what happened. LBJ said, we wouldn't run.